Hello, hello. Welcome back to Redressing Fashion. It's been way too long. Life has been lifing a little bit too hard for me recently, but I'm going to spare you of that because I have already dedicated space to it in my newsletter and my YouTube channel. So I think I'm just going to leave the details out of this episode. I will leave the relevant links for you in the episode description in case you're interested, in case you haven't already seen any of this. And I'm going to jump directly into today's episode. This is one that I have been wanting to create for actually quite a while, at least a couple months already, but I haven't really had the space to do it. So I'm really excited to finally get back here today and record it. So you might be wondering, what is this mysterious topic of today's episode? I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite definitions of fashion, or I'm actually calling them theories of fashion in my brain, although I'm not really sure that that's exactly how they are. And I want to connect them with the more mundane, practical, actionable aspects of getting dressed. This episode has been inspired by some of the personal style coaching work that I've been doing recently after leaving my last academic post a few months ago. So it is inspired definitely by the conversations that I've had with my clients in their wardrobes, around their clothes, around or based on their everyday fashion practices. And one of the things that I've come to realize is that while my ethnographer brain is always kind of connecting theory with practice, a lot of people don't really realize that in simply getting dressed, they are already enacting a lot of fashion theories. And so that's kind of what I want to bring to light, or what I want to shed light on today in this episode. I do want to say also that even though I've been spending a lot of time doing personal style coaching, I have struggled really to conceive myself as a stylist. And if you follow me on social media or even the podcast, my channel, you might see some sort of tension, I guess, in my recent posts because I simply don't want to be just another basic stylist. And scripting this episode and also just like thinking about it and really just the work with my clients that inspired me has made me realize that I am a sort of personal fashion anthropologist for my clients more than just a stylist. And I guess this is just proof that no one will ever take the doctor of fashion out of me, even though I'm no longer interested, or at this moment, I'm not particularly interested in going back to academia full time or in becoming a fashion professor again. But being the fashion nerd that I am, I have been constantly finding myself telling my clients about this or that theory or that history of fashion or this study or the sociology of fashion that shapes whatever it is that they're doing with their clothes, or the psychology of fashion and how that shapes how they can approach clothes. So basically, I'm bringing all the lessons out of the classroom and into the closet, however cheesy that may sound. And I'm actually loving it. So today's episode is a little bit of that. Definitely more focused on the theory than on the practice. But I hope it can be of interest and it can help us all think about fashion differently, whether we are more on the academic, scholarly side of fashion and fashion history, fashion anthropology, fashion studies, fashion sociology, or whether we are just simply people who love fashion and who love getting dressed every single day. So that's been too much of an introduction. Let's dive right in.
Have you ever imagined fashion being as diverse as human culture? Have you ever dreamed of a respectful, ethical, and socially just fashion industry? Have you ever envisioned sustainability being at the core of the entire fashion system? This is your host, Laura Beltrán-Rubio. I'm a fashion curator, researcher, and educator. My mission is to translate scholarly insights into actionable strategies that we can all take to reshape how we create, wear, and think about fashion. So find a comfortable seat, brew some tea, and open your notebook as you join me in the quest for redressing fashion.
I want to start us out with one of the most straightforward facts or theories about fashion, one that is so obvious that we sometimes forget about it. Fashion is an embodied practice, or in the words of fashion sociologist Joanne Wessel, fashion is a situated bodily practice. And Twistle goes on to explain that, I quote, human bodies are dressed bodies. Dress is a basic fact of social life, and this, according to anthropologists, is true of all human cultures that we know about. All cultures dress the body in some way, be it through clothing, tattooing, cosmetics, or other forms of body painting. This means that fashion exists on the body and with and through the body. And because we give meaning to bodies in society, fashion is also inherently connected, if not determined by the place and the space that we occupy, and where we exist communally with other individuals, other living beings, the environment. And from this main idea stem other important, but also often overlooked facts about fashion. The first one is that fashion is not limited to clothes, but that it can actually extend to basically any form of bodily adornment. And these forms of bodily adornment can be permanent or removable in different ways. The next fact is that fashion and bodily adornment shape our bodies just as much as our bodies shape fashion, meaning that there is a sort of reciprocal relationship between fashion and the body, and where fashion and the body are constantly creating and recreating one another. And this always happens in social interactions and in relationship with other people, other beings, other elements around us. The societal aspect of fashion necessarily means that our shared ideas about quote unquote comportment, or how we are expected to behave and carry our bodies, our manners, our customs, necessarily also influence fashion. Fashion therefore mediates between individuals and in different ways shapes our relationships with one another. And because all of these norms are created in society and often change over time as societies evolve and as human relations evolve, ideas about fashion and comportment also evolve in time. When it comes to personal fashion or self-fashioning practices, styling practices, knowing that fashion is a situated bodily practice actually helps us understand that we give life to fashion through our bodies and through how we choose to wear fashion. How we feel in our bodies is at least as important as how fashion looks. And I actually often encourage my clients to prioritize the feeling of fashion, the bodily sensations of fashion, over achieving a certain look, because you want to embody the best in getting dressed and you also want to look your best. And in a way, this comes from the inside out. If we learn to dress strategically, to feel a certain way, we can not only enhance or alter our own feelings or mental state, but we can also very consciously shape our relationships with the people around us and how different people perceive us or even treat us. Because fashion is a bodily practice, we can also kind of teach our body to feel in certain ways through fashion. And we can also kind of use fashion to train our bodies to react in certain ways, to act in certain ways by making bodily or embodied connection with certain aspects of clothing, with certain colors, with certain even garments, or even, I don't know, like accessories, amulets, things like that. So this creates a kind of subconscious feeling in the body, subconscious attitude that we can give shape through consciously, but that necessarily is connected with some other aspects of our existence that are just embodied, that we feel in our body. And so in a way, this not only connects body and mind and body and existence and our relationships with other people, but it can also help us connect conscious and subconscious aspects of our minds. The second definition of fashion has to do precisely with how we can use this fashion as individuals with our dress choices. This theory says that fashion is a practice of assemblage. This is one of my personal favorite definitions of fashion, mostly because it's the one that makes most sense to me as a multi-passionate woman who dresses herself daily. to face the world. And I must also say that the methods that give structure to this theory or this definition of fashion are also the key to my practice as a stylist or a personal style coach. This is to say that my entire style coaching method draws from the anthropological methods that shape the idea that fashion is a practice of assemblage. I won't get into the details of my approach today, but please do reach out if you're interested, and I'll leave the link for you to apply in the show notes. But back to the second definition. Put simply, fashion as a practice of assemblage means that we assemble fashion quite literally, with like put it together when we put together our looks. In the words of fashion sociologist Sophie Woodward, quote, by combining items of clothing in outfits, clothing practices are by definition practices of assemblage. When new items are combined with old ones, then the collection of clothing in the wardrobe is a possible resource through which new looks and fashions can be created by reactivating old items or making new combinations. Fashion in this case becomes a verb referring to the practice of fashioning our bodies, our looks, our identities. So through fashion, we are able to pick and choose what the industry feeds us, whether through images or products, or maybe through more abstract ideas and notions of fashion. And so we end up in assembling and picking and choosing from all of these external influences and some of the internal motivations that we have. We end up defining fashion in our own ways. Fashion as a practice of assemblage also brings together different facets, shaping acts of fashioning the body and fashioning ourselves. It recognizes the existence of an important and powerful fashion industry and the systems around it. It highlights how fashion is spread throughout multiple sites and spaces of provision, production, consumption, usage around the world. But it also acknowledges the deeply personal aspects of fashion that come to the forefront, especially when we get dressed every day. Within the immensity of global fashion systems, we as individuals construct how we look, quite literally, every day by selecting mostly clothes that we already own, following an increasingly rich and overwhelming catalog of possibilities. In assembling our looks, we have the power or the agency, as sociologists would say, to mediate between different aspects of the fashion industry and the broader fashion systems, both local and global. And so the key here is the negotiation that takes place between our intimate desires and the individual decisions that we make when faced by the external influences in the form of images of fashion that we see in magazines, shops, social media, in words and writing about fashion, and in different places shaped by usually the industry and some of the big industry and media players. In this process of negotiation, and somewhere in between the first and second definitions of fashion that we've touched, that is, fashion as a situated bodily practice and fashion as a practice of assemblage, lies the third theory of fashion that we'll cover today, that fashion is a system of signs. This means that fashion is a sort of language or a code that communicates social and cultural meaning through clothing. Put more simply, fashion is a form of communication. The idea of fashion as a system of signs is famously rooted in the work of French semiotician Roland Barthes. He proposed that fashion functioned as a language where the clothes are signs through which meaning is both created and transmitted. The signs that constitute this language can be the physical clothes, but they can also be written descriptions of the clothes or even images of the clothes. As signs, the clothes are synthesized at the conjunction of what Barthes calls vestimentary codes that carry meaning or signify the world, the culture, the society, and the ideas that are made sense of or signified through language. Roland Barthes centered his theory of fashion as language in the production of fashion magazines in the 1960s, so it's quite specific. But Alison Lurie applied similar principles of fashion as language to the broader and everyday practice of getting dressed. Lurie argues that clothing is a sophisticated system of nonverbal communication that has its own vocabulary and grammar. The clothes, the materials, the accessories, even the interventions that we put on or like create, make our bodies constitute the words or the vocabulary of this language. And then the rules for combining them are the grammar. In this theory, Lurie also equates dialects to the many different expressions and adaptations of the language of fashion among different groups, cultures, societies from around the world. And when the rules of the language are not properly used, or where there are variations or misappropriations, then this causes a fashion faux pas, which would probably be equated to a bad use of the grammar in another language. But this, of course, can open space for freedom of self expression and, most importantly, for resistance among greater social structures that are reflected and contained in many ways in the language itself. And this is actually something that we discussed briefly in different terms with Georgia Ennis in the interview that we did a few months ago. So I will also link that episode if you haven't watched it yet or listened to it yet. It's one of my favorite interviews so far. I do admire Georgia very, very much. And I am always in awe with her research on the ecologies of language and how that relates to fashion and sustainable fashion specifically, not just in the Ecuadorian Amazon, but in general. So I do recommend listening to that episode and following the work of Dr. Georgia Ennis more broadly. But anyway, coming back to fashion as language. As before, the main application of this theory of fashion is its communication potential, or its power of communicating, of enabling us to transmit messages to different interlocutors around us. And these meanings can be explicit or implicit, are socially constructed, as in any other language. Meaning in this language is also in many ways determined by our ways of knowing and preconceived ideas held within the society or the group within which the language develops. And even though there are many social and cultural structures that help us give shape to fashion as language, there's also always a risk of being misinterpreted or being misunderstood. The key lesson here, I would say, is to understand the codes of fashion and carefully decide how to use them, knowing, of course, that there's always a chance that our message doesn't come across exactly as we intended to. In our everyday fashion or style choices, we can choose to communicate in ways that are compliant with and subject us to certain norms, ideas, expectations, and even stereotypes. But we can also choose to resist in ways that may be more or less explicit or forward. And the level to which these are easily understood might also depend on who is our audience or who is the recipient of our message. As with any other language, fashion can be quite poetic and can open space to resist by allowing us to express ourselves. And this can be done, for example, by elegantly adopting metaphorical and figurative language whose meanings will only be fully uncovered in detail by expert eyes. And these expert eyes don't have to be scholarly eyes. It can be just the people within our culture who get the point. It's that kind of if you know kind of idea that is most frequently seen when it comes to certain brands, certain looks, certain ideas. But I do think that it has an extremely important potential when it comes to cultural codes, especially codes of cultural subversion that are charged with history, with meaning, especially with contra-cultural, maybe even decolonial ideas. And so, in this kind of constant interaction or negotiation between us and the community around us, between us as individuals and our interlocutors, especially when we're talking about fashion as a language, we also see a sort of tension between subjection to social norms versus the agency or the power that we have to express ourselves in and through fashion. And this brings me to our next definition of today, that fashion is an articulation of identity. This definition brings together the aesthetic qualities of fashion with its capacity as a visual language. In sociology, the concept of articulation is used to refer to a process whereby connections are made temporarily between different social, cultural, and political phenomena. Because these connections are temporary, they can also be assembled and re-articulated as the context shaping cultural ideologies and social forces changes and evolves. As an articulation, fashion is therefore constantly changing, but not exactly due to changing trends or changing offers in the market or any other industry fostered strategy. As an articulation of identity, fashion is an essential tool through which we actively, and if we choose to consciously, construct, negotiate, and communicate our identities. Like articulations themselves, identity here is ever changing. For sociologists, in fact, identity is not simply something that we are, because identity is not static. And many of us can probably think back to how we've changed through our lifetimes and no longer identify with aspects of ourselves that were true to us in the past. Fashion cultural scholar Susan Kaiser has explained identity as the ongoing process of answering the questions, who am I and who am I becoming? Fashion, therefore, becomes a sort of reflection, or some would say metaphor, of our constantly changing fluid identities. Fashion, therefore, has the capacity to articulate the multiple, variable, complex, and at times even contradictory characteristics that make up our identities, or that constitute what we believe to be our self. Importantly, when articulating our identities, whether through fashion or not, we are always inevitably influenced by others around us. In answering the questions of who am I and who am I becoming, we are inevitably also trying to figure out who we are not, often too in comparison, conversation, or relationship with others. In doing so, we are constantly negotiating between our own individual ideas and experiences and those carried and perhaps even imposed by societies around us. In the process of articulating our identity through fashion, we are therefore always balancing between the need to conform or fit in and our desire to stand out or differentiate ourselves from everyone else around us. The application in this case is not dissimilar from what we've already discussed. Through fashion and the ways in which we choose to adorn our bodies, including but not limited to clothes, we actively construct our identities and make statements about our lives. This is about communication, of course, but also about literally creating our realities and establishing our position in the world we inhabit through fashion. When we take culture, society, politics, and structures of power into account, as we choose to articulate our identities in getting dressed, we can also actively use fashion to resist certain systems, to claim space, to use societal structures and forces in our favor, or to shape them in our favor. And with this, we arrive at our last fashion theory of the day. Fashion is the cultural construction of embodied identity. This definition is offered by Fashion Theory, arguably the world's preeminent academic journal dedicated to the analysis of fashion practices, cultures, and histories. It was founded in 1997 by fashion theorist and curator Dr. Valerie Steele, also known as the Freud of fashion, and whose amazing career and most recent publications of fashion and psychoanalysis are worthy of at least an entire episode of this podcast. But we're not going to go into them today. Fashion as the cultural construction of embodied identity brings together many of the aspects that we've already touched on in the theories of fashion introduced so far. The second half in particular has been explored quite literally in previous definitions. That fashion is inherently tied to the body when we say it is a situated bodily practice, and to our ever shifting identities when we call it an articulation of identity. The first part, however, merits a little bit more depth. That fashion is a cultural construction means that it is not inherent, nor given, nor static within a society or culture, but instead that it is a cultural product that's actively and constantly designed. Societies, cultures, and human groups more broadly generally dictate what fashion is and what is deemed fashionable based on historical, social, technological, ideological, political contexts. Here is where fashion as language, as a practice of assemblage, and as an articulation come into play. So I would say that this last definition of fashion is the most encompassing one. Considering fashion as the cultural construction of the embodied identity means, in short, that how we dress is not purely personal choice. Instead, it is a learned social process that shapes our physical bodies into visible representations of cultural norms, values, and identity. With and through fashion, our dressed bodies make social meanings visible. And we can choose to partake in the cultural construction of fashion and our embodied identities as actively as we want to create exactly the meanings that we desire. This once more leads back to agency or the power or the capacity that we have to consciously use fashion to express and create our identities in society and in relationships with the people, other beings, the environment around us in our everyday lives. Having fallen into this all encompassing definition of fashion, I think we are ready to start bringing ideas together in my three little things for this episode. I like ending with three small nuggets of information or of knowledge that also help us take the more abstract or in days like today, theoretical aspects of fashion into practice that help us connect the theory and the history with the action. And so, my first little lesson or my first little thing today is necessarily that we all can, and if you ask me, we all should embrace fashion's capacity as language, as practice, as construction to literally shape our relationships with the world around us and even with our own selves. We can and we should consciously determine how the world defines, perceives, and treats us every day when choosing how to dress and how to present ourselves to the world. And that, of course, includes how we also define, perceive, and treat ourselves and present ourselves to each other. The second little thing is that you don't need to follow trends or wear designer brands or know about history or color theory or body shapes to participate in fashion. And you don't have to be interested in it either. Just by getting dressed every day, however you choose to do it, you are already taking part in fashion and self fashioning. By simply putting clothes on, you are shaping your body, assembling your style, communicating a whole lot of meaning, articulating your identity, and constructing culture both individually and collectively or socially. And the third little thing is one I've been touching more and more often with my clients recently. Fashion is simply not about the look. It's not about looking in a way that's somewhat similar to what we see in magazines and ads and social media. It's not about being taller or thinner or curvier or fairer. It's not about looking just like everyone else around you except for the little sparkle of personal style. It's not about looking extremely different to everyone else and having this one signature style that's separate from everyone and that no one has ever seen before. Instead, fashion is about self expression and self empowerment. It's about choosing to feel in a certain way and express it through the clothes that you put on your body. It's about reclaiming your values and heritage, owning them and communicating them through how you present yourself with the world. It's about sharing your gifts with everyone around you. It's about feeling confident in your own skin. It's about feeling so good from the inside out that you inevitably look good, and nobody will even dare to think about comparing you to the images produced by the industry, or how fashionable you are, or how trendy you are, or how many designer brands you are wearing on a particular day. And so now that we've made this all clear, I think we can draw to a close. And also considering that it's getting quite dark here because there's a huge cloud. We haven't even touched on fashion as the essence of humanity or the human condition, or its roles within spiritual and religious practices, or the association of fashion with notions of morality and propriety. There are still definitely many other theories or definitions of fashions that we could dive into, but that is probably the topic for a different episode, and we'll see if we can make a part two happen. For now, I would love to know your thoughts about these theories and how they connect with your own fashion practices, with your own ways of getting dressed every single day in your daily life. I would love, love, love to hear if any of these theories resonate, how you apply them, and maybe how you can use them strategically to kind of shift a little bit who you are, or construct maybe your identity a little bit more consciously through fashion. Please, please, please share your ideas, your experiences, your reflections in the comments, or reach out to me via email, via social media. I would really, really love to hear from you. As always, thank you, thank you, thank you for listening, for watching, for reaching out, for being here. I'm very excited to finally be back. I'm working on several very exciting episodes, including a few interviews that I will be recording very soon. So do stay tuned for more, and I will see you again very soon. Thank you again for being here, and until the next time, bye bye.